Hi, I'm Ron. This is the Service Design Show, episode 236.
There's a lot of talk about AI taking over design jobs. But what if that's the wrong way to look at it? What if the age of AI is actually the biggest blessing service design has ever seen? As interfaces disappear, a new space is opening up. A space for someone to mediate, to strategize, and to orchestrate. A space that might just be perfect for us. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what is truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. Our guest today is a thinker, a maker, and a practitioner who embodies the idea that everything is a service, waiting to be improved. He's Ron Bronson, the former head of design at 18F, and now a professor at the University of Michigan. But that's just one part of the story. People who know him are often surprised by the different places he shows up. Whether he's coaching high school tennis, talking about Finnish baseball, or redesigning complex governmental services. This wide range curiosity isn't a distraction, it's his superpower. It is what allows him to see the world through a unique lens, constantly asking, why are things this way? And challenging the very foundation of our craft. And that's exactly what we get into today as we explore why service design might be stuck and how we can make it more relevant. So in today's conversation, you are going to learn about why many of our service design methods are still stuck in a 1990s department store mindset. A practical strategy to introduce service design into your organization, even without official buy-in. How to reframe your work as design, as repair, instead of just building new things. Why building trust is your most important goal and how you can actually achieve it. And about the crucial skill of identifying and naming the unnamed work that no one else sees. What I personally found fascinating and didn't see coming was how our conversation about AI completely flipped the script from fear to opportunity. Ron makes a compelling case that as interfaces disappear, a new unclaimed territory is opening up for us to lead. It's a sharp strategic take on where our field can provide the most value next. Alright, there's a lot for us to unpack here, so let's get right to our conversation with Ron. I'll be back at the end with a few of my own key takeaways. I'm your host, Mark Fontijn, and this is the Service Design Show. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Excited to talk about service design, geeking out on service design. You have quite an interesting background and profile. I just had a sneak preview in our prep chat. But I think it would be very helpful for us listeners to understand a little bit more about your journey, where you're coming from, and where are you today. So could you share that with us?
So I live in the U.S., obviously, here in the city of Portland, Oregon, which is on the West Coast, not too far from Seattle, and wedged between Seattle and San Francisco. I like to tell people. And my work, I guess most recently, I was head of design at a government office in the US called 18F, which was basically like, if you think of essentially an internal strategy and delivery consultancy inside the US government. And I spent about 7 years there. And my background has always been sort of inside of institutions. So, government and education, always working on systems, always working on services, platforms, CMSs, all those kinds of things. So it's been my whole career has been kind of in this space.
And what are you doing these days, if anything?
These days, I'm working for a consultancy. I just started doing that, and I am a part-time professor at the University of Michigan, which is not in Oregon. People get confused by that. It's a whole thing. Not for the show, but a thing. And I stay busy.
18F, we heard some news about that, not for the right reasons, for the good reasons.
Right.
But it is what it is. 7 years.
It is.
Yeah. Um, so we'll be tapping into definitely some of that experience. When we were preparing this conversation, one of the things, a few things stood out for me, but one of the things that you mentioned was that you feel service design is too opaque. Did I get that right? And
You did.
what do you
Yeah.
mean with that?
So one of the things at 18F that I feel pretty happy about in terms of building the design team, going from an individual contributor to a design manager to the head of the practice, was something we talked about years earlier. Was we'd love to add service design because if you think about it, obviously I spent a lot of time in Europe. It's not controversial to talk about service design. People know what you're talking about a lot of the time, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
In the US, people don't know what you're talking about almost ever unless they're really, really design nerds. And even then, everybody has a different sort of framework, a different modality, a mental model for what service design actually is to them. And it's usually profit driven. And so to be able to bring that to a space that in public services and all of that. And so to me, the way I'd always approached service design since I decided that's what I was doing was to treat it like something that instead of saying, I'm doing today, I just did service design on you. We just did the thing we were doing. And maybe I never told somebody that at all. And so I think service designers, like a lot of designers right now, get so caught up in craft and focused on making the best diagram or the best map or the trying to really perfect the process instead of thinking about what they're delivering, what the actual purpose is, and working backwards from there. And so that's where I feel like service design is opaque and could be better. Even the name itself is a little, in a world full of services, what does that mean, right? Like in 1980 that made a lot of sense, but in 2025 you're like, what do you do with that?
Okay. Okay. So caught up in the process, caught up in the deliverables, caught up in the craft. But before we sort of pull that string a little bit more, you mentioned that there's a lot of confusion, even misconception about service design. But you're in the US, so how did your journey into service design go?
I think it dates back. It dates back a lot of reading, a lot of reading. A lot of folks online who were, in the early 2010s, folks bringing these conversations more to audiences in the U.S. A lot of folks on the West Coast who were, doing again, bringing it to the market, thinking about it from a how do you improve uh, business services and not really thinking about it from the public service angle as much. Although have been organizations that were doing that, but it hit on my radar from there was a group in Finland again where I spent some time in Helsinki, the Helsinki Design Lab. That was a brief effort that happened, and those folks were doing more strategic design. But just even reading about these, even that was like revelatory for me. I'm like, wait, I do this. This makes so much sense. Why aren't we doing this all the time?
Mm.
And from there, I think I got more plugged into the service design network and reading a lot of the different books that were being put out at the time. And that's really what brought it to my radar. And so again, because I was spending a lot of time outside of the country and talking to people who were deploying these things, doing this work, it made it really easy for me to be like, okay, how do I bring these conversations to the spaces that I'm in? And then how do I interpret this in a lens that will allow me to do these kinds of things? And so that's really where I started, probably about 10 years ago, really adding it to my practice in a more formal way.
And maybe a podcast here and there that inspired you. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, there was definitely a podcast that inspired me. We too
There
much
aren't too
spawn
many.
con, but no, it's great. There are too many. There are not too many. You're right.
Okay, so importing service design from Europe into the US, that's interesting. Now, what do you feel like? Okay, if we're getting caught up in those conversations about the craft, perfecting the craft, the process, if those aren't the conversations that we need to be having, what are the ones that we should?
That's a great question. RIP Twitter. But during the Twitter era, I remember during the COVID era, I had a tweet that I wrote that said something. I can't remember the exact quote because I'd have to find it. I have an archive somewhere. Basically, I was remembered it. I was at the was getting my COVID shot for the first time, and I went through the whole line. And the way they did it here in Portland at the time was you went to this convention center, and the experience, despite the sort of ominous nature of the situation, it was one of the best service experiences I'd ever had in my life.
Give me another shot. you,
Literally, I mean, but like, so you park your car, you walk into it's America, you force you park your car, you park your car and you walk into the convention center, and there were people outside making sure that you could guide you to the door you needed to go through. There was really good wayfinding signage. Every single step of the pathway had a human able to tell you where to go so you wouldn't get lost. All using really good language around, trying to be encouraging. These people were scared about all this stuff. You went through the process, every single person through that process, there was someone at every touch point guiding you all the way to getting your arm shot, making you wait, make sure you don't fall out, and then you leave. And I thought, well, one, this is a really terrible moment. This is a terrible way for us to really bring this to life. Wow, we really did it. But the other thought I had was, this is the moment, at least in my interpretation, it was naive, I believe. But to me, crisis was the
Mhm.
key opportunity for all the things we've talked about as service design to be able to come to life and show us like this is the thing we can use right now to really add some velocity to the things we're doing. And it wasn't built for the moment.
Mhm.
It was like it was very clear to me that this is the moment that service design's been talking about, even though we didn't say crisis, and nothing about the moment was built for that. And I thought, oh wow, so we need to throw all that out. like none of that is. It's great for whiteboarding. It's great for putting sticky notes on a window. But when it comes to actually deploying in situations where this is life or death,
Mhm.
these are moments in time. So that was really for me what uh changed my lens on this. And obviously we're seeing it now with all the different things that are happening in the world, AI and all these things that are happening. The the world that we originally like the world that created the conversations that make up what we think of as service design, whatever, wherever you come in and wherever you come in at, sort of where entry point that you come into service design at. To me, the conversations need to be different. You say, what conversations should we be having? Well, for one, it's thinking about where does the service designer come in to the process. Anybody can tell you that. Again, having headed up a team, it took a lot of effort for me to be able to bring in service designers in an area where service designers obviously made sense. The success that we had was being creative about, okay, I'm gonna use one of my UX hiring billets to bring in a service designer. I'm gonna staff them as a UXer because that's what I can do in this org. And then over time, you bring in more UXers who are service design fluent. And over time, you say, how about we create a practice around service design and see how that works? And then because I was in a place that kind of had some creativity to it, and because again, it was the most natural place for service designers to be, government, um, those folks showing up, hiring good people, showing up and doing what service designers do well at their best, made people go, "Oh, this service design thing is excellent. How do we get more of that?" But not everyone has the ability to a be that patient, b to hire folks, to bring them in like that. And so we're not able to scale the thinking in an adaptable way.
So you had an opportunity to bring service design in on a Trojan Horse labeled UX because that was the line item for
Right.
HR. And
Right.
then slowly but surely you managed to grow it that way.
Yes.
What happened? Like you mentioned that people started asking you to do more of this kind of work. So you created like a pool from within the organization instead of having to sell it, to push it. Like, how did you create that pool now looking back on it?
Two things we did. One, again, really, my philosophy on hiring designers broadly. and the 18F specifically was, I want designers that can do more than one thing. Like, I'm a designer who can do more than one thing, right? Like, if content strategy is my main practice, being able to do research, being able to lead a project, gives me the ability to be in more conversations and add more value to that project team. Yeah, I can get into GitHub. Yeah, I can deploy and I can write a little bit of code. Like, having that ability gave me frankly, it's why I'm talking to you right now, right? Like, that's the entirety of my career, is being able to be that adaptable. And so I wanted designers. I didn't need them to have 4 or 5 skills, but I wanted them to have 2 core skills at least. And so by doing that and by building that as sort of the philosophy of our practice broadly around design, designers could show up in ways that maybe in other spaces they weren't able to. So you had designers who would grow and become leaders of teams, leaders of projects, graduate off and become directors. And so I think the trust that we built from that made the pivot to service design, and pivot, adding that as a discipline, core discipline we were doing, I think a little bit more natural. What we did though, in terms of the actual service design, sort of, adding that to the flavor of the work we were doing, I think finding the right shapes of service design type, like strategy. Think about strategy, not even service design. Strategy engagements, projects around strategy, things that are more 0 to 1, ideation, things that these days a lot of folks would attribute to a PM, a product manager. That we had our service designers able to show up and do. Hey, I can go into here and I can build you a roadmap. I can build you a blueprint, but I can also take that and we can go further. And by doing that a few times, that the sort of like velocity that our designers were able to deploy, I think built trust, but also showed people, because they had design skills, they were able to show you things that
Mm.
maybe the engineers couldn't do because they were thinking about it in a different way, or maybe the PMs couldn't do because they were doing it a different way. Not that we didn't work collaboratively with our teams, we did that well. But I think that what they brought to the table show uniqueness. Hey, what are you again? What do you do? I think the other piece that I didn't mention is the education piece. We did do a lot of internal education around, here's what these things are, here's what this means, here's what they do, so folks better understood what service design was from our perspective.
Okay, so education, I'm curious about what you specifically educated people about. But the other thing, um, it feels to me like, especially in the early days, uh, people were showing up uninvited to meetings and
Mm.
doing
Yes.
work uninvited because their peer or their colleague in another department team wasn't able yet to formulate the challenge that they would bring to this person, so they had to create their own mini project briefs and started doing work that nobody was asking for but that they knew was valuable. Is that a correct assumption?
I think that's accurate. Yeah, I think that there is so much work that is unnamed and that no one owns, because no one owns it and because it's unnamed doesn't make it not work. It
So
just,
yeah.
because we haven't named it, it just ends up looking being sort of left on a table.
So, Ron, this is, I think, a very interesting situation because, like you said, there is so much work. How do you know, as a professional, which challenges to take on and which to leave on the table? Because, sure, I can make you a roadmap, I can help you with strategy. There are a million things I can do for you, but how do you know what you should do?
I think it's really understanding the organization you're in. Like, you really have to be able to, and sometimes you don't have a lot of time to do that. Maybe you're new to an org and you're being pressed with a lot of different complex challenges all at once. But I think, to the extent that that's where the research comes in, being able to do that internal research around what the challenges are, what the practical realities are. What are you being charged to do? Maybe you're on a team. What is the team's actually being charged to do? And by understanding that, it allows you to be able to figure out not only what you can sort of itemize what the problems are. You don't even need a fancy blueprint. You just put down a sheet of paper of like, here are the things that are the problems I'm identifying. And then from there, being able to understanding, managing up, managing down, managing laterally, figuring out from that, okay, these are the things that are important to these people. Here's what's important to me if I've been in the org long enough to have an opinion about it, and then being able to tackle things. I think the other thing, the one B to that is prioritization and like taking out smaller chunks. We're so interested in the big picture all the time and not smaller modalities, smaller tasks, checking smaller boxes and doing things iteratively rather than trying to always attack the big problem.
I'm curious if you have tangible examples. So you've been doing internal research, you've been understanding the organization. I'm sure you've had a moment where you did
Yes.
something, you took a small chunk that turned out to be the golden nugget. Enlighten us. Like, what did you do? What happened?
I was where I worked. This is when I was still in IC. I worked on a project where we were working with an agency around basically building software from a manual process around like large grants, like large national grants, like talking about 50, 60, 70 million dollars. And these were like, and you figure there are 56 different states, US states, territories that all use this system. And it was all manual. And we were helping them build a system to, actually build software to do this on the web to make it faster for them to do this. And there was a lot of opposition to us doing this because they're like, well, you can't possibly understand this process. It's too complicated. You don't do this work. And so we had, instead of thinking about our big picture was we're going to just build, this isn't that hard to build. We can just build software. We just spent a lot of time working embedded with the people who were skeptical. And this took a lot of research with them internally. So our goal really was just to get them to say yes to us doing what we were doing. Is that a bad example? Sorry, I
I
can give
don't
you another
know. I
example.
don't know. So you spend
Yeah.
a lot of time embedded with the team, helping you or getting them to say yes to what you were doing. What were you doing?
Oh, you mean what we were building, or what did we
Well,
do to get
so
the team?
what is the yes that you were looking for?
In this case, the yes we're looking for is this: building the system is a good idea, a thing we will use, and not a thing that you will build and then it will go on a shelf
And did you get
and
there?
go.
Yeah.
We did, we did, we
What,
did, we
so
did.
looking back, like what was the trick? Like,
3 months of iterative sprints where we spent 2 weeks researching and working with the embedded folks around the country who are willing to talk to us, getting their feedback, understanding their process, doing testing, and then 2 weeks of build, adding the things we learned from them into the prototype, going back to them, showing them what we did based on their feedback 2 weeks earlier, and then getting more feedback. And we did that, cycles of that, over 3 months. And that took us from absolutely not to when can I have this in 3 months.
what's the lesson that we can draw from this?
I think there's an allergy to research in the US specifically. As an allergy to research, people often think it takes too much time. Um, Designers can be very precious about the questions they ask, and they're more interested in the process of research and gleaning those insights rather than trying to get to some sort of level of done in that. And I think that the lesson I always tell is that if you can bake some time in to do the research, understanding that in our case, our goal was to build this thing. And so our research was shaped around trying to understand the problem enough to get the trust.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the lesson is the trust. You've got to build trust with who you're working with, whether it's internal trust, external trust, customer trust, user trust. You have to, if you violate that trust, you don't get it back often.
Mm.
And so our goal was to build trust. No, we're not here to disrupt what you're doing. We're here to make it better. Let us show you.
I
We're going to take
yeah.
time and show you.
Trust
Yeah.
is such a key issue, but it's so. Speaking about opaque things, that's one of those mythical unicorn qualities. Building trust, like if you teach as well, and if a student would ask you, like, okay, sounds great, Ron, like trust building, yeah, I'm all for it. Where do I start? Like, what would you say?
Actually spent a lot of time with the class I taught a service design about this around, because students these days were really good at prototyping. They're really good. They
Vibe
understand
code,
how
everything, yeah.
they get. This was actually last year, so they weren't vibe coding yet. I bet now next year there'll be a lot of vibe coding everything. But you're right. Like they know how to. They know. Like, oh, you want to build an app? I could talk to them like they were already, like junior employees
Mm.
in a lot of ways, in terms of like how much fidelity to do to building a thing and all of that. What they didn't have the skills to do, because you're in school, is knowing how to write a one-page brief, how to extract the most relevant information for a senior stakeholder, because you don't learn that in school. Like your teacher wants you to write a long 5-page paper about a thing. And so I spent a lot of time with, hey, look, you don't have very much time for this to be able to present this idea. And so you need to extract the best ideas to help them understand that you know what you're talking about. And so that's really, again, doing the research to understand the space you're in, because that can often be the trust you're building. It's not about, oh, hey, it's just you can trust me. I'm blah 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 blah. No, show me through your work. And that depends on where you're coming in at to be able to do that. Maybe that's, if it's meeting someone for the first time and speaking in their culture and letting them know you understand something about them, that builds trust. Maybe it's, going into places and listening. We talk about when you deal with underserved communities or minoritized communities, and being able to go in and being a listener and a participant rather than someone who's an expert coming in and trying to, because people have done that to them for a long time. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about building trust. And again, where I think service design shines the best is being able to do that kind of work in different spaces and showing up in those kinds of ways.
Do you feel that we're living up to our potential in that aspect?
I think that aspirations and the realities of where technology, since that's where we work, is going have diverged. So I think that, if you all the magazines I read and all these different articles I'm reading, and I think folks are very much asking the right questions and are existing in the right places. I think the issue is understanding that the on the ground realities of the practice look much different than how we write about them in our journals or in our conferences and so forth. And I think being able to better understand that is where we could be better. Is where we're going to have to be better, because things are moving really quickly.
Okay, we're very curious to hear about that gap. So, what is the gap that you see between the way we talk about this at conferences versus the reality?
Well, for one, there just aren't enough people thinking about the work the way that we all are, right? And so, because service design is still, in my ways, like I think in many ways obscured by other types of other kinds of design practices. Um, when you think about on the ground realities, think about like your garden variety Walt motorcycle delivery person, like using a phone app, right, with all kinds of apps with lots of notifications blasting in their eyeballs all the time. Um, it, that's the reality of everyday life for a lot of people. And I just one random example, but I think that when you talk about touch points, you talk about front stage and backstage, like all this stuff's great. But what does that really mean in a world that's increasingly sort of being mediated by platforms, mediated by software and by algorithms, right? And like, where does service design come into those conversations? How do we, what is our role in that? Like, how does our practice um sort of update its understanding of how people engage with services? We're still building for a world where folks go to department stores,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and they don't do that anymore.
Okay.
so
Yeah.
what does that look like? I like saying that service design to me is the orchestra pit at a theater. You can't see the orchestra at a theater. They're hidden. They're the pit orchestra. They're hidden on purpose. But if they mess up, you'll notice. And to me, that's service design. But we don't see ourselves that way. I think we see ourselves as something very different. I don't know how we. I don't know where we show up in that metaphor. But that's how I see us.
You're asking a lot of good questions and making my job pretty easy today. So, uh, if we need to redefine or reevaluate the way we show up and look at our work, instead of designing for the IKEA experience of going through a shop and moving from department to department, like give us some of your thinking. How do we need to evolve? What are some of the directions we can look into?
I've talked a lot about lot. This year, I've been really working. I sort of two different things I've been working on. One has been for years. I've talked about this idea of consequence design. It's online at consequencedesign.com and .org. And I've talked about this for a long time. Basically, the original idea was very, very focused on interfaces and thinking about someone going to a train kiosk and in the U.S. they're awful. If you traveled to the U.S. lately, but they're all really bad. The transit kiosks are terrible. They're shouting at you. There's the wayfind. The screens are
It's an
really
experience,
bad.
Ron. It's an experience.
Oh, it's an experience, but it's an assault to the eyes. And the senses, all the senses are activated in a really bad way. Your caveman ancestors would not enjoy it. And watching folks navigate these tools and being like, it can't be that hard. I'm gonna go do it. And then I would do it and be like, this is awful. Who made this? And this is in 2015, 2014, 2013, in a much more quaint world than the one we live in now, right? Which is hilarious to think about. Um, and so anyway, that's really what got me thinking about, you know, who is making the interaction interfaces that mediate everyday experiences. You and I come to you, you work at the store, I come get it, I buy a thing from you, I know your name. There's a whole person to person interaction there. And 10 years ago, the screens intermediated that. And now we have this disintermediation where people want agents to do that. They don't want us to talk at all. And and so I've sort of evolved from the consequence design framing and thinking more about design as repair. And so in thinking less about what we can build and more about what we can fix, and having designers show up in different ways to be able to think about what is our role in the stack of actually making things work. That we built these systems, great. How do we improve the systems? How do we give voice to that and amplify the need to improve systems, or improve tools, or improve platforms in real time?
I like that. That might just become the title of this episode, Design as Repair. So let's double click on that. Um, what do you think is the biggest mental shift when you start thinking about design as repair? Like, give us some examples.
Here's an example. So, an example: a couple of years ago, we're working with the United States Marine Corps, and they wanted to build, yeah, very super. It didn't go anywhere because of the situation at the time, but it was like one of the more interesting things I had worked on. I actually spent some time in the Air Force as a younger person, so I had a lot of experience with deploying. And all they wanted was, hey, we want an app so that you can order like food and like bullets basically while you're forward deployed, like because like right now you got to call on the radio and it takes a lot of time. There are no cell phones, you can't use a cell phone because it could be of the security risks, so you've got to use radios. But it just there's a lag but if you can use this app, even if someone does a service, can be sent eventually. They can get it, and that'd be better. And I'm like, what an interesting use case. Like, okay, like war is bad, but also like they're doing this regardless. So it would be great if you could make it a little bit easier for them. And it's a pretty universal modality. Like, this is it's a pretty useful universal need. And so it's an interesting use case to think about. Um, so take other examples of disasters. Right now, as designers of any sort of scope or sort of shape, we would think about how can you make it better for them on the back end after the fact, not during. And we're doing this based on interviews with the person, interviews like you and I are having right now. After you've done it, please, Mark, recall for us what it was like to be in the hurricane or the typhoon. Tell me what would be easier for you during that. And I think of design as repair as no, designers who have the skills or the experience or the desire to show up embedded in situations, to experience the thing like the users do, and to understand the problem spaces as they're happening or just after. So instead of going in as the hero with a pen and a notepad or an iPad, instead it's no, grab a shovel, help clean up after the thing, watch what's happening. Maybe you can ask questions if you get the right setup. And having those kinds of experience allow you, and you can do that in situations that are far less catastrophic than what I just named. But thinking more of I saw a tweet the other day from a friend. I told him I'm going to start using this term. He said it as forward deployed designer, and he didn't mean it like I'm meaning it. But I immediately latched onto it. Well, first I was offended by it as someone who's deployed for real. It's like, what? Shut up. But then after I thought about it a little bit, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take that.
So how does that play
And you
out?
think
Like forward deployed design for us who haven't been part of the military or haven't been deployed. Like, what does that mean?
I think it can mean whatever we want, but I think less about the military, thinking about deployment in a true sense, and thinking more about instead of designer as observer or designer as participant. To me, it's designer as someone who can understand the problems in real time. Like you learn so much from what, like certainly you all bike everywhere. You learn so much from being out and experiencing the senses, being in your neighborhood, understanding how to go from point A to point B, what the shortcuts are. Don't go down that road because every day there's a blah 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 and a yada yada. At 2 o'clock there's always a train. You know that because you go down that road all the time. I feel like that increasingly we've zoomed further and further out
Mm.
from how the real world works. Like so much of our everyday experience is mediated again by platforms, by systems. And cities are not equipped in the US especially. Cities are not equipped, but this isn't just the US problem. I said I go to Finland a lot and I see all the Wolt drivers sitting in corners of doing things. And I see how these informal networks of different platforms have disrupted the way that everyday life operates. But we operate, if you close your eyes and you just thought about life, in some ways, we still exist like it's 1995, but everything is totally different. But society operates. You still get bills in the mail. It still operate like if you really like my mother, my dad. They still live like it's 1998 in a lot of ways. They have bank accounts online. They don't check it. They go to the physical bank, right? They still pay bills on the phone, like in your mail.
Interesting. I'm trying to imagine like how would this impact or change our field or profession? Like what would change if we would adopt this mindset?
Well, for one, I think it makes it more relevant. Like right now, service designers have a hard time getting traction. If you don't work at a big think of who I think at the peak of service design to me is a couple of years ago when, like all the big companies in the US had service designers and everyone was super excited about it, treating it, heralding it like the next frontier of something. And then that moment's gone. That moment's no longer here. And thinking about where those people showed up, financial institutions, big pharma companies, right? Like companies that had the scale and to be able to go and bring in
The
30
finance.
designers.
Yeah.
Just the finance to be able to afford to be able to bring those designers in. That's cool. That's great. You made my app, you made the financial app 10% easier for me to use. Thank you for that. That's great. What what obviously in government, it's another thing. But what if that we could show up in other places that are not those things?
But we aren't? Is that what you're saying? We're not showing up?
It's not about not I think we would show up if we were called, if someone called us.
Mm-hmm.
But right now there isn't an understanding that, again, I think earlier we talked about there are so many jobs that are not being done right now, right? There's a lot of work left on the table. And I think if we could figure out how to name those things, to identify those gaps, and to name that as work, as debt, technical debt, design debt, operational debt.
Experience
If
that.
we
Yeah.
can experience debt, if we could encapsulate all of that into something and start naming that, then it all of a sudden and also being able to tell the story of operationally, we saw that debt, we identified it. This role, this person, these people were able to name that, solve it, and improve things by X percentage, right? That all of a sudden creates a value space where we can show up where we're not able to show up right now because folks don't know they need us. And we can't really tell that story without, a long-winded explanation
Mm.
about, journey mapping or something,
Mm.
journey management or something. Which is cute, but okay. And what?
Okay. I've been in the service design space since 2006, 7, so almost 2 decades now. And it feels like this is an ongoing challenge. Like everybody wants, or at least the stories that I'm hearing around me, everybody has the desire that service design one day will just be as recognizable as calling the plumber. Um, I don't know. I have my doubts if it still hasn't happened, if it will ever happen. And my take on this is, do we actually need that? Like, you're right that we need people to call us to solve the challenges that are there, because there are tons of challenges that we can help with. But the desire to make, I don't know, to make it ubiquitous and well known to everybody, I'm not sure. Like, what's your take on this?
I agree with you. I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but I would say that it is, to me, more. I think the ceiling on good service design, I'll say this is controversial. We're
Let's
on the service
go.
design pod, service design show. I can say it. I think service design at its peak is a lot more valuable than the other model. Like the other, not the product design is great. It's great. The UK, it's great. Like that's wonderful. But I mean, I think pound for pound, dollar for dollar, euro for euro. Like, give me a service designer, give me a UXer. I'd rather have the service designer. Like, I'm gonna get further and be able to do more things, right? Um, and I know every job has its own thing, but just in terms of dexterity, and it being able to be fluid. And so I think that it's less about, to me, it's less about the ubiquity and sort of having this omnipresent designer experience, and more about giving a lot of about students again. A lot of the students ask me, everything I hear about service design, I want to do more of that. How do I get a job doing that? And I'm like, you can't. Like, you're probably not going to get a job doing that. Sorry. Like, but if you want, here's places you can go to do it, but probably not, right? Like, don't get your hopes
Mm.
up. Why? How do we change? Like, how do we change that? And that's where I'm at. I don't think it's really about, like I said, having it everywhere. But I do think that the discipline could be crafted in a way to allow the conversation to be different, to be viewed differently. Um, and I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how to solve that. I think you're right, though. The ship may have sailed.
Differently in which way? That's my question here.
I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning, that there are unique problems that we are not solving well because the right people are not able to. A thing that I learned from all the years of working on this stuff is that how you frame the problem is just as important as how you solve it.
100%. Yeah.
Because we don't have designers writ large, but especially service designers, able to be in the conversations to shape these problems
Mm-hmm.
early
Mm-hmm.
stage, the problems we solve are often the wrong problem, or the misscoped problem more often than not. And that's a thing that we have not been able to permeate, like really get through the brains of people across disciplines, in my mind.
Mm.
Is that everybody really has this one or two black and white sort of, like sort of linear ways of thinking about how problems are shaped, scoped, and solved. And I think that having more of this kind of thinking in these conversations will allow us to really reimagine how we do that. And I think there are a lot of wins that are being left on the table as a result of that. Gains, maybe even.
I'm fully on board with what you're saying, and in the meantime, I was also sort of reflecting on my experience in the past years. Um, and in many cases, service design is a solution to a problem that's not yet or not yet well articulated. And maybe, and I'm curious to hear your take, but maybe the underlying issue that we face as a field, as an industry, is that organizations haven't yet acknowledged that they are in the service business. And if you don't acknowledge that you're delivering a service, like there is no service design necessary. Like there's nothing to solve. You're going to solve, like you're in the logistics business or you're in the engineering business and you don't call somebody with expertise on services. Like, what's your take on that?
I love everything about what you said. Uh, the service business. But I think in a world increasingly with platforms dominating the conversation, people who are everything's logistics at this point, right? Everything is some sort of supply chain at this point, or at least the undergird of it is. Uh, but those are all services. It's all about deployment. It's all about delivery. Whether it's last mile or not. Uh, that lack of honesty. I think the word service is where we get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there is some sort of education in that, but I think that the word service, to serve, I think is where people get hung up,
Mm-hmm.
because honestly, at least here, I think people often think of service as a fast food experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They don't think of it in any other way, right? Maybe it's the retail, the customer experience. That's the term that makes me break out in the hives personally. Right. I think that's more often. Actually, a really good example of that is, more often than not, one of the issues I had with getting service design adopted in my last spot was people talking about CX a lot, and CX just stealing all the service design language and putting it on. But this customer experience. Like, no, it's not. That's not real. Stop that. That's not real. Stop that. and, and and it's a little dismissive of a thing, but it was how I felt about it. And it took a lot of education to get people to understand the bigger picture, of that. But yeah, I like what you just said. I don't have anything to add. Sorry, think of
No,
something
no,
else.
no.
Sorry.
Well, I'm happy that it resonates. At the same time, if that's the case, then the mountain that we need to climb is pretty high because services. The word service is either loaded, has baggage, has heritage, and is misunderstood, or it's not understood at all. And the word design also has a lot of baggage and heritage. So, like, it's putting these two words together that doesn't make it a lot easier. Um, there have been some conversations, and you mentioned this earlier that you've been doing service design without just talking about service design. I'm a big proponent of that. Um, is that the way forward? Just getting in the rooms and doing the work without actually labeling it? How do we become more relevant? Because that's what you were eventually aiming at.
I think that I was thinking of a quote from Magnetic Ball wrote, Thinking in Services book. It's definitely not like a casual read, but one of my favorite books about services because it's dense, but I just love that it's like just going off into space thinking about services. And he talks about, services as agreements. And I really I love that metaphor of services are just agreements. We're just you and me deciding to exchange something and its core. um, I think that the showing up and doing the work and not naming it thing is a blessing and a curse for the practice, right?
Absolutely.
And so maybe like it's not one of the things I did. I worked in local government for a while, and I was just in charge. Was the front end designer in charge of the website. But I took the initiative to because your time my title was made up, and I called myself, I was a webmaster. Is how long ago this was.
Hmm.
It was like webmaster, and I put webmaster and service designer in my bio, and I'd put that in my
Hmm.
email signature all the time.
Hmm.
And it was fun for me to just be like to just signal it, to
Yep.
show it to people that this is a thing that exists. Here's what it does. Here's what it is. Oh, you want to know more about it? I'll tell you about it. I'm just going to do it though. And I think some of that kind of intrepidness could be a really good way for people to sort of make it more visible. Um, I think that, I sort of have a dream of all this work being like I've had a dream since the early 2000s of like being able to go to a store, go to a kiosk, and get your problem solved, or your digital problem solved. Like just now they want a bot to do it, but this is what I imagine humans doing before we made them rendered them useless. uh and I think service design has a to me there's a mental model that is, you said the plumber earlier, but I sort of see it like that. Like is there a form factor of human that exists that allows us to show up in more modular ways to triage and you know I don't know.
Okay.
I'm curious.
Let's do some forecasting. You mentioned design as repair. We talked about trust. We talked about many other things. If you fast forward 2, 3, 5 years, all those interfaces, touch points are changing every day, even faster. Like, how do you? Maybe I wanted to ask, how do you envision service design to look in 3 to 5 years? But maybe the better question is, how do you hope service design will look in 3 to 5 years?
I'm going to be controversial.
Again.
I think that the AI age might be the biggest blessing for service design as a practice, because the need to be sort of mediators between, frankly, interfaces, right? All these chat and modalities, just interfaces and people, interfaces and systems, interfaces and services. Who better than service designers to bridge that gap? It's not built for UX. Product designers can build the interface, but they can't talk between them. Service designers can. And so being able to position ourselves as that layer, you got to sell out and love AI. But you also, it's not going anywhere. So what are you going to do? To me, I think if I had my wish, it's we are able to build relevance through whatever this next iteration of this thing is, being able to be that bridge, whether it's agents, whether it's, new form factors of LLMs, whatever that is, right? Probably just embedded in systems that already exist. Um, Able to figure out how to bridge those gaps as a practice. And I don't know exactly how that shows up or what that looks like exactly. Like, what does the role look like? Probably different than it is
Mm,
right now, where it's not just like Franken UX. It's something a bit more, specified to the org that you're in. But in my mind, this is, like I said, I'm being mildly spicy in terms of futuristing this, but like, if you think about, people think agents, your agent and my agent will talk to each other. I say no, your agent and my agent, but it's really your service designer and my service designer are the human API layer of the future architecture of some of these systems that we're building. That, to me, that's the stretch goal for this, to me.
yeah, there's no UI/UX design when there is no interface anymore. So that's that.
Correct. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Exactly.
their job is going away.
Their job's gone.
Their job
Right. Their
is
job's
gone.
done.
Yeah, within
Right.
a few years. So
Right.
should we be now become more vocal as a community on every platform that we have and ask questions? Maybe not provide solutions, but interesting that AI stuff like that agent, those bots. Who's going to sort of navigate, strategize, orchestrate the experience of people actually using these things without naming service design, just asking these questions? Is that
I think so.
is that the strategy forward for the next years?
I think so. I think it's inventing the jobs.
Inventing the
I think
jobs,
it's
yeah.
so I think it's so crucial for us to be inventing the different ways these jobs should exist. Like, what is that role? Right now, the designers aren't showing up in these places. These companies are starting, they have,
Yeah.
they're not there. They're not in the conversations. I've made myself in a lot of these conversations on purpose because we're not there where we should be. Certainly not in the decision stack. We might be in the design stack, but we're not in the decision layer, and we should be.
So what's really interesting about this, Ron, and I hope everybody is still paying close attention, when we are entering as service design professionals nowadays, we're mostly entering into well-established organizations where we have org charts, where we have defined roles, we have defined problems. Everybody has their own responsibility and the sort of own silo. But what you're proposing, and I love that idea, is that with AI, it's a blank space. Like, okay, it could be owned by engineering, like maybe, probably, unfortunately, maybe. But that is a new area that is still undecided, uncaptured, and we have the opportunity here to at least claim a part of that problem space, which isn't yet claimed by heritage or by right.
100%. Yes, I agree. And maybe it's a fork, maybe it's not a fork, but I think that again, the term, I just bagging on service as a term, but I think that, again, it's a really, these are services,
Everything is a
microservices
service.
nonetheless.
Yeah.
Everything is a service, but I mean, these are the definition of services, and who better to show up to interpret than the practice?
What would be like one or two questions that you'd post on LinkedIn to get somebody to think about this problem space if they are talking about AI? So you see, I don't know, a marketing dude or
Yeah.
girl posting something about a cool AI thing that they've just launched. Like, what's the question that you'd post as a comment that would get them to think?
The first question you'd ask them is, uh, who's your imagined audience for this? Like, who's supposed to use this?
Another
Because
AI,
often,
another AI agent, obviously.
probably, right? Yeah, probably another agent, right? But they wouldn't tell you that. They probably say, "Oh, it's a blah 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 blah. Everyone can use it." Not wrong answer. Try again. Right? Nope. Try again. And I think the other thing I'd ask is, um, yeah, I think the other question is, I'm very much, again, the consequence thing is, asking questions. What if it breaks? What about bad actors? Um,
Mm.
Malintent. Like, thinking about some of the more, like, very, very, like, so what if it doesn't? What if it fails? Or even asking innocently. Okay, let's just make up a tool. Hey, we just invented a new AI. Blah blah blah. It's gonna. All you have to do is connect your bank account, and it will every day it'll take 10 cents and put it in a separate account and you'll save dollars, right? Let's just make that up, right? First question I have is what if it takes the money and puts it in the wrong account? What if it gets it wrong? How do what's
Mm,
your like asking like
mm,
what about data?
mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah,
the AI agent's gonna buy your clothes for you. Mark, you don't want to buy clothes. Don't buy clothes anymore. Just tell the agent what kind of shirts you want. And every week it'll buy you a new shirt. And I'll say, what if it buys me the wrong shirt? Who do I call? Do I call you? Do I call the shirt company? They're gonna send me back to you. Do I get a refund? What if it buys me 20 shirts instead of one shirt? Right?
I'm already imagining a visual or a sticker where you see sort of a journey map and you have an AI agent doing a task and then you have a big question mark after. Like, what's in this box? What happens over here?
Right. You could internal a total new journey map based on, like you said, these sort of or even a blueprint where it's like, your front stage, backstage, and then like
Sure.
the the malicious path,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
the ideal path. So they're different because like my biggest thing about the service blueprint as a artifact is it always imagines that every user, every person's experiencing the service exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that to me, that's a big problem. The assumption of, well, everyone's going to go through the store and it's the same way. And I'm like, even the same store you go to, depending on what neighborhood it's in America, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it may be a different experience because of where the store is and who serves who it serves.
I I like this idea, and I think it's like such a simple visual could be already so powerful. Like, okay, arrow, a box, question mark. What happens here?
What happens here? What
Have
happens? What
yeah.
happens if?
Have you thought about this? Did you know that this can actually be designed?
Right,
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 right.
right. Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly.
Okay, opportunity and a blessing. Okay, Ron, we're approaching the end of our time today together, but not before we leave off with again a question. I think questions are more interesting than answers. So, what is the thing that you'd ask us as a service design community listening to this conversation? What do you feel is a worthy question to spend our time walking the dog, doing the dishes, or taking a shower thinking about?
We've talked a lot today about, I've frequently cast a pall on service design for practice in many ways. But I think that when you're walking the dog or you're thinking about whether you are like a deep adherent to service design, if you're listening to the show, you probably are, or if you're somebody that's more service design curious, I think the question to ask is, how do we reimagine, period? How do we reimagine, dot, dot, dot? One of I go back to the COVID era a lot. One of the most interesting things about that era, like almost overnight, especially again in the US specifically, was how many things that I thought never would happen that happened. I mean, it's like geopolitically, even around like, certain political parties who were like, we've got to give people money. Hurry up, get them the money. And I'm like, wait, things shutting down, things opening, all these things that we've been told that could never happen, all of a sudden happen immediately. We marshaled the resources. We came together. We did the things we were supposed to do. And not everything went well. A lot of folks died. A lot of terrible things happened. But at like a base level. And so as we think about services, as we think about our future casting, it's clear that we can invent new forms of being, new ways of being. But we can't do that at scale because we don't have the power for that. Sure, if they gave us the con for a day or two, we figure some stuff out. But if we zoom down just elementally and think about what can I affect around me? What can I do in my neighborhood? What can I do in my city? What can I do in my area? What I'd say is instead of thinking about the big picture so much and thinking about how you zoom out really far away, let's zoom back in and just walk around the block.
Mm,
What can you fix? What can you fix from
mm,
all that dog walking path? What can you fix from where you started to where you walked to? That's to me service design's future.
mm,
Is if we can get elemental about let's fix the problems
mm,
block by block. And if we can do that, like on a bike ride, What can you solve? I go down the street and I see 8 things that I'm like, I don't know if I can solve this, but I bet there are better ways to approach it than how we're approaching it.
Mm,
Because to me, that's service design. That's the power of service design. It's what we bring to the table. But because we're so focused on the big picture, often we don't think
mm.
about. We just pass by those solvable problems. So there you go. Think about that when you're getting your kombucha.
I'm going to do a +1 on this one because I recall an episode here on the show a long while ago where one of the guests was giving the example that what he was doing was going around desks at the office, sitting down next to somebody, and like literally solving an issue for them. Could be, I don't know, a Google Sheet thing, could be. So your suggestion is, what can you do on your bike ride? I would suggest do a round around the desks and
Yes.
see if you can solve a problem a day. Like do a problem a day challenge for a month and see what happens.
I used to do when I again ran websites. I used to do office hours where I would just sit in a lunchroom. I'd sit in the lunch cafeteria at this place with a sign. Folks could sit down and talk to me about
Mm.
stuff, ask me about what we're doing, bring their problem, their question. And I made so many relationships that way, but I also solved a lot of problems over a lunch period, eating my lunch.
You don't know this, but we recently did a podcast where our strategy, our ultimate service design strategy, was to bring donuts. So bring donuts to work during office hours. You'll be golden. It's not
Absolutely.
that hard. All right. Ron, one final thing. You already mentioned that you've been sharing some things about consequence design. Are there any other resources you feel are interesting to share here? And if people want to get in touch, what's the best way?
Well, you can find me online at ronbronson.design. I'm online at ronbronson.com. You can find me online. Happy to chat about whatever.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on, sharing your thoughts and ideas about the history, the current state, and the future of service design. Really looking forward to where this is going. I think I'll have some interesting conversations in the coming years ahead. Service design isn't going anywhere, but it's evolving, that's for sure.
It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
What a thought-provoking chat that was with Ron. For me, the idea that will stick around long after this episode is the concept of design as repair. It's this powerful shift away from the big, abstract frameworks and towards the tangible, human scale problems right in front of us. It brings to mind Ron's final challenge to simply walk our own block and see what we can fix. A huge thank you to Ron Bronson for that grounding perspective and for reminding us that our biggest impact can often be at the smallest scale. It really makes you wonder, what is the one small improvement you can make for someone this week? If you have enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Click the like button on this video and leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithms, but to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.